Scan the ground under a mature tree or along a north-facing wall. In most yards, these are dead zones, patches of barren dirt where grass and sun-loving perennials simply refuse to grow. Hostas are biological outliers, plants that evolved specifically to thrive and dominate in these zero-sun environments. They possess incredible scale, capable of stretching 8 feet wide and surviving harsh winters across USDA zones 3 through 9. Their aesthetic range is just as broad, with foliage spanning from deep forest greens and waxy blues to bright golden chartreuse. On the left, we see the reality of an untreated shade garden. On the right, the exact same square footage is transformed by the lush, overlapping canopy of mature hostas. These plants establish a permanent architectural structure, providing the heavy lifting required to turn a dark corner into a functional part of your landscape. Most nurseries market shade perennials as a set-it-and-forget-it solution, plants that require nothing more than a hole in the ground. But there is a biological conflict here. The cool, damp, shaded soil that hostas love is the exact optimal breeding habitat for the garden slug. Slugs are soft-bodied mollusks, not insects. This means the broad-spectrum garden insecticides you use for beetles or aphids are completely useless against them. They are also nocturnal feeders, striking primarily at night or during the cool, cloudy weather when you aren't out in the garden to see them. They target the tender new growth in the spring, leaving behind shredded leaf edges and irregular, ragged holes that last the entire season. To maintain a pristine shade garden, you have to acknowledge this environmental conflict and build a defense plan around it. The most efficient form of pest control actually happens before you ever start digging. It's based on the genetic traits of the hosta's leaves. Thin-leaved hostas with white variegation are popular because they provide bright, delicate contrast in a dark corner. This chart plots hosta types by resistance. Thin, variegated varieties sit at the bottom. They are highly vulnerable to slugs and require active management. Higher up, you'll find varieties bred for leaf corrugation, a heavy, puckered texture found in hostas like Big Daddy. This thick skin and waxy coating acts as a physical barrier that slugs simply struggle to chew through. However, selecting blue, waxy varieties for their pest resistance requires a specific placement trade-off. Direct afternoon sun will melt the wax coating right off the leaf. To keep that blue color, these plants must stay in deep, protected shade. Selecting the right genetics upfront is the most effective passive defense, but it forces you to choose between bright, delicate highlights and low-maintenance durability. If you choose the more vulnerable varieties, you'll likely find internet advice suggesting crushed eggshells, coffee grounds, or cornmeal. These methods are popular because they feel inexpensive and easy to deploy around the base of the plant. This matrix shows how these defenses actually perform. While eggshells and coffee grounds provide a dry, rough barrier initially, that effectiveness drops to zero the moment they get wet in a damp shade garden. The evidence-based alternative is a layered strategy that focuses on altering the microclimate where slugs live. First, you only water in the morning. This gives the soil surface time to dry out before slugs become active at sunset. Second, you must clear dead leaves and debris from the base of your plants to remove their cool, damp hiding spots. Finally, as the matrix shows here, a light scattering of iron phosphate bait is highly effective when used in combination with those environmental changes. Real results come from changing the environment of the garden, not from scattering kitchen scraps. Beyond pest management, there is the matter of spatial planning, especially with giant varieties like Empress Wu or Humpback Whale. These plants become massive focal points that can easily define an entire landscape. But that scale takes time. These giants often require 3 to 5 years in the ground before they reach their full mature diameter. If you space them based on the nursery pot rather than their eventual spread, the garden will be severely overcrowded. Overcrowding chokes out companion plants and creates stagnant, damp air pockets that invite fungal disease. This leads to the final mandatory labor cost, the hard fall prune. Once the first hard freeze hits, all of that dead foliage must be cut back completely to the soil line. This is non-negotiable. Leaving collapsed leaves on the ground provides a perfectly insulated winter habitat for next year's slug eggs. Growing giant hostas requires precise spatial planning and a commitment to seasonal cleanup. It dispels the myth that shade gardening is ever truly hands-off. To decide which path is right for you, look at this flowchart. The strategy starts by determining your actual pest tolerance. If you have zero tolerance for hunting slugs or applying bait, you belong in the hands-off optimizer category. This means you must restrict your palette to thick, blue, heavily puckered varieties, and accept that your plants will grow at a slightly slower pace. The alternative is the high-impact designer, the gardener who wants the bright, delicate, or massive show-stopping varieties. This path requires a full, active commitment to morning watering, clearing dead debris, and applying iron phosphate to protect your investment. Coordinating your maintenance threshold with specific leaf genetics ensures the garden remains a landscape asset rather than a recurring chore. If you have a damp, shaded yard but have no interest in fall cleanup or weekly pest checks, avoid thin-leaved and highly variegated hostas entirely. Planting vulnerable varieties without a defense plan simply means you are providing an expensive, premium salad for the local slug population. Hostas are a spectacular investment for a dead yard, provided you are willing to pay the slug tax, either upfront through deliberate variety selection or week to week through active maintenance. If you have a wet, shaded yard, you already know the struggle. After a heavy rain, these low-lying drainage zones can turn into muddy bogs that completely swallow up delicate plants. Standard lawn grass doesn't stand a chance here. Instead of a lush carpet, you end up with a thin, mucky eyesore. And if you try to fix it with traditional shade-loving plants, they usually fail too. The heavy, waterlogged soil suffocates their roots. This is where the concept of a rain garden comes in. But planting a rain garden isn't like planting a normal raised bed. These environments are highly dynamic. They cycle back and forth between being completely submerged underwater and bone dry. It's easy to grab anything at the nursery with a wet-tolerant tag. The problem is, those generic labels rarely account for the extreme flood and drain cycles of a real rain garden. Guessing on plant placement guarantees wasted money on root rot. To build a successful wet yard, you have to map specific plants to distinct moisture gradients based on actual stress test data. This photo shows the physical setup of a university study designed to test perennial survival across cyclical flooding. Researchers submerged potted plants in water tanks to simulate short one-day floods and heavy four-day inundations. To measure how the plants handled the stress, they tracked chlorophyll fluorescence, a precise indicator of a plant's photosynthetic efficiency. By tracking that internal metric alongside physical root biomass, the researchers could see a plant's true tolerance long before any visible signs of decay appeared on the leaves. The study then categorized these candidate plants by their ability to maintain active photosynthesis during the critical four-day draining phase, right after the floodwaters receded. This raw botanical data gives us the power to move past trial and error. We can use it to build an exact, foolproof spatial matrix for rain gardens. This illustration breaks down the physical topography of a rain garden into three distinct moisture zones: the wet base at the center, the moderate slope, and the dryish margin around the edges. Before you plant anything in the lower zones, you absolutely must amend heavy clay soil with compost. Compost introduces organic matter that physically alters the soil structure. It creates essential pockets of oxygen, which prevents root suffocation during severe wet cycles. Down in the deep basin, or the base, you face the most extreme conditions. This area holds water for up to 96 hours, a full 4-day flooding cycle. You need specific, highly resilient heavy hitters here. Plants like Siberian iris and Japanese meadowsweet thrive in this exact environment. The university data confirms it. During the heavy 4-day flooding simulations, these specific plants endured prolonged drowning with zero physiological stress and continued normal growth. The deepest basin must be strictly reserved for these aggressive growers. They are the only ones scientifically proven to survive the worst conditions. As we move up to the slopes and margins, the flooding typically only lasts for 24 hours. This data table reveals what happens when a sensitive species, Gaura lintimeri, faces the heavy 4-day cycle. Look at the root dry weight. The control group sits at 8.72 grams, but the 4-day flood group drops to 6.35, proving a massive loss of root mass. While these sensitive plants survive a rain garden environment overall, their root loss means they must be strictly zoned to the dry upper margins. Treating all rain garden plants equally and planting them uniformly across the yard will result in the deepest water drowning out your margin-specific plants. Successfully planting a rain garden is an exercise in precise microtopography. You match a plant's specific physiological tolerance to the yard's distinct elevation zones. There is an aesthetic drawback to most wet-tolerant perennials. They go completely dormant, dying all the way back to the ground in the winter. If you rely solely on thick-leaved hostas and irises, your yard is going to look like a barren mud pit during those cold, wet months when drainage is at its worst. The aesthetic solution is to balance the plant life with heavy structural hardscaping. Boulders, statuary, or water features keep the garden visually interesting even when the plants disappear. You also need evergreen or woody shrubs to maintain vertical interest above the snow and mud. This photo of a coast redwood shows exactly the kind of structural anchor we mean. Along with plants like red twig dogwood, its massive trunk structure provides reliable, year-round vertical anchoring in wet shade. Surviving the water isn't enough. The landscape must be structurally anchored with stone and wood to remain visually engaging year-round. This chart maps how you visually mix the understory. We plot flood tolerance against 3 key textures: rigid grass-like leaves, thick broadleaves, and feathery accents. If you fall into the eco-landscaper profile, your primary focus is stormwater management. Because you are dealing with deep flood zones, you must rely exclusively on those scientifically vetted 4-day heavy hitters to handle the bulk of the water. On the other hand, if you are an aesthetic homeowner focused on low-maintenance visual appeal, your approach changes. You should prioritize heavy upfront compost amendments. This allows you to safely zone your delicate, feathery plants onto the elevated margins where they won't rot. Long-term success in wet shade is not achieved by fighting the water, but by strategically pairing verified plant physiology with your yard's microtopography.
You look at your yard, seeing an opportunity for an upgrade, but standing right in the middle is a massive, mature tree. It provides shade, anchors your property value, and represents decades of growth that you cannot easily replace. The problem sits directly underneath it. The grass is thin, choked out by roots, and struggling to survive in the dry shade. The instinct is to rip out that patchy lawn and replace it with clean hardscaping, river rock, or dense flower beds. What most homeowners do not realize is that standard landscaping practices will slowly kill the tree over the next few years. It starts with the soil preparation. Bringing in a rototiller to break up the dirt, or dumping heavy fill dirt over the area to level it out, causes immediate trauma. You are actively severing the fine feeder roots that live just below the surface, or suffocating them under the weight of the new soil. Then there is the popular choice of laying down a weed barrier and covering it with decorative rock. This creates a thermal trap. The rocks bake in the sun, heat the ground below, and compress the soil structure, physically suffocating whatever roots survived the initial digging. Even if you avoid heavy machinery and rocks, simply removing the grass triggers another hidden threat: drought shock. A mature tree growing in a lawn relies heavily on the shallow, frequent watering of your turf sprinklers. When the grass goes, the sprinklers usually get turned off, and the tree is suddenly cut off from its primary water supply. To prevent drought shock when you remove the lawn, arborists enforce a strict baseline rule. You have to supply the tree with 15 gallons of water per inch of trunk diameter, applied twice a month directly at the drip line. This leaves you with a tough logistical question. If you cannot till, you cannot add heavy soil, you shouldn't use rock, and you have to maintain a rigorous watering schedule, how do you actually fix the dry shade zone? And what does it take to repair the compacted urban soil beneath it? Keeping the tree alive means trading the desire for a fast, aggressive aesthetic makeover for a patient, data-driven approach. You have to treat the biology of the soil first. Almost all urban trees are fighting the same battle. The soil around them has been compacted by years of foot traffic, lawnmowers, and construction. Rainwater hits this hard surface and runs off instead of soaking in, leaving the root system starved for moisture. The most effective surface intervention is laying down a 4-inch depth of wood or bark mulch. The strict rule here is that you must pull the mulch at least 6 inches away from the base of the trunk.
Piling mulch against the bark traps moisture against the wood, inviting disease and rot directly into the tree's vascular system. This cross-section shows wood mulch acts as a porous sponge. During summer drought, it retains 61% more moisture. Compare that to rock mulch. Rocks reflect massive heat, driving soil temperatures up and accelerating evaporation. Wood mulch gives you the highest return on investment for tree health and soil moisture, with minimal physical labor. The trade-off is entirely visual. You have to accept a natural, utilitarian woodland aesthetic instead of the crisp, manicured look of white river rock. Sometimes surface mulch isn't enough. If your property sits on dense hardpan clay, or the ground has been severely crushed by heavy construction equipment, the soil is physically locked. Water and oxygen simply cannot get in. For these extreme scenarios, arborists use a deep remediation process known as AFM. That stands for air tillage, fertilizer, and mulch. The process starts with a pneumatic air tool. It shoots a supersonic blast of air into the ground that fractures the compacted dirt instantly. Because it uses air pressure instead of metal blades, it decompacts the soil structure without cutting a single root. This chart tracks percent soil organic matter across 4 distinct treatments on urban trees. When researchers applied air tillage entirely on its own, the organic matter in the ground actually dropped below the control baseline, harming the soil quality. Fracturing soil with air improves oxygen, causing microbes to rapidly consume organic matter and starve. That is why AFM immediately backfills loosened soil with fertilizer and compost. This feeds the microbial breakdown, resulting in a massive net gain in soil health. The data proves AFM works to reverse severe compaction. But bringing in specialized pneumatic tools and hundreds of pounds of compost requires significant capital and intense labor. It is a heavy-duty intervention meant strictly for failing urban soil. What if you refuse to settle for just a circle of brown mulch? If you insist on having a vibrant garden under your tree, you have to adopt a specific planting strategy called the woodland edge. This means completely abandoning standard gardening habits. You cannot dig a wide trench, you cannot run a rototiller, you cannot build a retaining wall and pile 2 feet of planting soil up against the trunk to create a raised bed. Those shortcuts are lethal. Trenching and tilling blind you to the root system, guaranteeing you will slice through the tree's feeder network. Piling wet planting soil against the trunk buries the bark, creating a permanently damp environment that allows fungal rot to chew directly into the wood. The only safe way to integrate plants is to get on your knees with a trowel. You have to probe the dirt carefully and dig small, individual holes strictly in the empty pockets between the major tree roots. Your plant choices are heavily restricted by this environment. Standard sun-loving ornamentals will fail competing for the limited water and light. You have to select tough, drought-tolerant, shade-loving perennials like epimediums or liriope that are genetically adapted to survive under a canopy. To clear out patchy grass or weeds before planting, you can use a glyphosate-based herbicide. It is safe for this specific application because it has no residual activity in the soil once it makes contact, and it is only absorbed through green leaves, meaning it will not penetrate the mature, woody bark of your tree. Cultivating a garden beneath a mature tree is entirely possible, but it requires you to accept a slow, highly manual installation process and swap the standard nursery flowers for specialized dry shade survivors. This flowchart maps out exactly how to proceed based on your specific yard. Your first step is to self-diagnose your soil. If your ground is heavily compacted hardpan clay that a shovel can barely scratch, you are on the AFM route. You will need to invest the money and effort into pneumatic air tillage and deep compost amendment to guarantee the tree survives the transition. If your soil is in decent shape and your main goal is just a tidy, weed-free zone, skip the mechanical tilling completely. You want the mulch-only route. Laying down 4 inches of wood mulch saves you hundreds of dollars and hours of labor, while still delivering over 90% of the moisture retention and organic benefits your tree needs. And if you have healthy soil but insist on flowers, you are on the woodland route. Buy dry shade perennials, grab a hand trowel, and prepare to dig carefully between the roots. There is no single easy fix for dry shade. Saving an irreplaceable tree while upgrading your landscape means taking a hard look at the dirt you are standing on and matching your physical labor to the biological reality of the site.
Pushing a heavy lawnmower across a 30-degree incline is dangerous, and trying to pull weeds from a steep, rocky bank is exhausting. Most people end up staring at bare dirt or harsh industrial retaining walls because standard landscaping simply doesn't work on extreme angles. But there is a biological solution. In this video, we see a vibrant carpet of blooming magenta creeping phlox. It rapidly cascades over a harsh stone retaining wall, physically smothering weeds and softening those hard edges as it spreads. During April and May, the plant produces a solid sheet of color that provides critical nectar for emerging native bees. When those flowers fade, it settles into a dense, evergreen mat of needle-like foliage that permanently holds the soil tight throughout the harsh winter. To pull this off, you need a spot that gets at least 4 hours of sunlight a day, and you must have soil that drains well. You'll also need basic hand tools and a tape measure. By preparing the site properly, you convert a steep, unmowable liability into a permanent, self-sustaining ecological asset. Start by getting your hands dirty. Manually clear the entire planting area of existing weeds, grass, and debris. Once the surface is clear, step away from the rototiller. You must not till the soil, especially if you are working on a steep hillside or a sloping bank. Tilling loosens the top layer of earth, which invites severe erosion the next time it rains. It also churns up dormant weed seeds buried deep in the ground, bringing them exactly to the surface where they will sprout. Next, we calculate the planting layout. To achieve total ground coverage, individual phlox plants need to be spaced 12 to 18 inches apart. For 15-inch spacing, multiply your total square footage by 0.64 to get the exact plant count. This equation works on irregular shapes too. As the grid warps to an uneven hillside, it dynamically calculates the plants needed. Now you dig. Your hole needs to be 2 to 3 times as wide as the root ball, but absolutely no deeper than the nursery pot it arrived in. Following this strict mathematical spacing and entirely avoiding the tiller keeps your plants from competing for resources, prevents you from overspending on excess plants, and ensures the structural integrity of your slope remains intact. When you place the phlox into the hole, check the elevation. The crown of the plant, where the stems meet the roots, must sit perfectly flush with the surrounding soil surface. After backfilling the dirt, gently press the plant's trailing stems flat against the ground. This contact encourages stems to root and grab the hillside. For the first growing season, give the planting area a deep, weekly soaking. This water allows the shallow root system to establish a firm grip in the soil. But once year 1 is over, you have to stop watering. Overwatering is the single most common way to kill an established creeping phlox. This species evolved on dry, rocky cliff faces, making it highly adapted to drought. If it sits in soggy, poorly drained soil, that trapped moisture will rapidly rot the roots and kill the plant. To keep the root system rot-free and healthy, you have to practice forced neglect. Unless you are in the middle of a severe, prolonged drought, rely entirely on rainfall. There is one mandatory maintenance task you have to perform every year: the post-bloom shear. The timing is strict. You must do this between late May and mid-August, immediately after the spring flowers drop their petals and stop blooming. To shear a mounding phlox, aggressively slice away the top third to half, leaving a compact green base. This matters because the pruned base quickly regenerates into a thick mat, while a neglected plant turns woody, hollows out, and lets weeds penetrate. Now you might want to expand your planting. Because creeping phlox spreads via a shallow, creeping root structure, trying to dig up and divide an existing plant is difficult and often damages the roots. Instead of dividing the roots, take stem cuttings. It is a highly effective, zero-cost alternative for multiplying your coverage. The process takes 3 steps. Strip the leaves off the bottom and press directly into moist soil. By applying a harsh annual haircut and propagating those clippings, you can endlessly expand a dense, weed-blocking barrier across your property for free. This drone footage shows the final result. A once barren, rocky hillside is completely concealed beneath a dense, blooming mix of pink and lavender creeping phlox. Beneath those vibrant colors, the plant is doing heavy ecological lifting. The dense mat halts soil erosion integrally, and the early blooms provide a critical food source for hawk moths and native bees. You permanently eliminate your most difficult yard labor. There are no steep angles left to mow, and the thick foliage prevents hillside weeds from ever seeing sunlight. Let us know down in the comments which color of phlox you plan to use on your difficult slopes, hot pink, white, or lavender, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more landscape solutions. A single afternoon of careful, strategic planting yields a lifetime of structural stability and visual perfection in your garden.
If you drive past an old, abandoned homestead, long after the roof has caved in and the people are gone, you will likely find one plant still thriving in the overgrown yard, the daylily. It survives environmental stress tests that would kill most garden perennials. From the freezing winters of North Dakota to the blistering heat of southern Florida, spanning USDA zones 4 through 11, it endures bone-dry summers and deep freezes with equal ease. You'll find it holding its ground in treacherous landscapes, gripping flooded riverbanks and stabilizing steep, unstable hillsides, where the soil is prone to sliding. There is a common taxonomic misconception regarding this plant, starting with its name. Despite the appearance of the flowers, daylilies are not true lilies. True lilies belong to the genus Lilium, and they grow from relatively delicate bulbs. Daylilies belong to an entirely separate genus called Hemerochilus, and they are equipped with a survival morphology that is built for durability rather than delicacy. To understand why this plant is practically indestructible, we have to look past the flowers on the surface and dig deep underground to uncover a kinetic mechanism capable of generating active physical force. Beneath the soil, the daylily skips the usual passive, stringy root system. Instead, it builds an aggressive subterranean network of thick, fleshy tubers. These are known to botanists as contractile roots. They perform 3 distinct tasks simultaneously. They absorb nutrition, they store water to survive droughts, and they execute active physical contractions. This life cycle is visible in the physical structure of the root itself, which is divided into 3 zones. At the bottom is the precontractile tip. Above that is the swollen contractile stage. The top is the post-contractile zone, which appears shriveled and wrinkled. That surface shows mechanical action. The root actively shortened, pulling its top downward by 70%. This shortening isn't a sign of decay or dehydration. It is a deliberate mechanical movement designed to physically drag the plant through the dirt. To see how a plant generates pulling force, we have to plunge through the outer layer of the root and examine the honeycomb-like internal cells. In the P model of contraction, middle root cells expand radially, pulling their vertical cell walls tight. This stores massive longitudinal elastic stress, loading the root like a spring. When internal water pressure drops, these stretched walls snap back, forcing the entire column to shorten instantly. This cellular chain reaction generates a surprising amount of energy. We can measure this force and compare it directly to the power produced by mammals. This chart shows peak force. A daylily root generates 1.57 newtons, actually stronger than a rat calf muscle's 1.42 newtons. The difference is the time frame. The rat's muscle fires in milliseconds. The daylily's single contraction takes 22 days to reach full distance. This is a slow-motion, one-time botanical muscle. It provides the immense physical power required for a plant to drag its way through heavy, compacted soil. When you scale this physics back up to the whole plant, you have thousands of these roots executing their 22-day contractions simultaneously. As the roots swell, grip, and shrink, they weave a dense, interlocking network that physically stitches the earth together, allowing the plant to remain anchored on slopes that are too unstable for other vegetation. This downward drag also protects the plant's vital crown. By physically pulling its own core deeper into the earth, it stays shielded from surface freezes and the drying effects of severe drought. Because each root generates over 1.5 newtons of force, the daylily can bulldozer its way into tough, low-fertility clay, where the soil resistance would stop other root systems entirely. The daylily's common reputation masks a highly effective mechanical strategy. Its ability to produce vibrant, daily flowers in such difficult conditions is built upon this unyielding subterranean engine, which provides the constant stability and hydration the plant needs to thrive where others fail. If you want to add vertical height, movement, and winter interest to your yard without spiking your water bill, ornamental grasses are an obvious starting point. For decades, the standard way to achieve that tall, meadow-like aesthetic was to plant a species called Miscanthus. But relying on miscanthus comes with a severe ecological cost. It is an aggressive self-sower, producing fertile seeds that routinely escape garden beds and crowd out native plants. To solve that problem, the landscaping industry shifted its focus to an entirely different genus, Calamagrostis, commonly known as feather reedgrass. Within that category, one specific cultivar absolutely took over the market, Karl Forster. It dominated because of a very specific biological trait. Karl Forster is a sterile hybrid. It rarely sets fertile seed, meaning you get guaranteed neat vertical columns without the risk of a backyard invasion. But because it is so foolproof, developers plant it everywhere. If you've driven past a corporate office park or a gas station recently, you've seen stiff, unmoving rows of Karl Forster. It has become a soulless landscaping cliché. To find out what else is out there, we can look at a 4-year comparative trial run by the Chicago Botanic Garden, which evaluated 11 different reed grasses against that standard. By looking at their results, we can find ecologically safe, sterile alternatives that give your yard structure without making it look like a commercial parking lot. A good place to start your search is with the variegated cultivars. These are direct upgrades for gardeners who want their grasses to do some heavy lifting early in the spring. The closest match to the robust size of Karl Forster is a grass called Eldorado. Instead of solid green foliage, Eldorado pushes out blades with pronounced golden stripes running straight down the center. You can use that pattern deliberately. If you match Eldorado's gold striping with early blooming yellow perennials, you create precise color echoes that tie an entire border design together. If you prefer cooler tones, the trials highlighted a second variegated option, Avalanche feather reed grass. Avalanche features a reverse variegation. It has a crisp white center stripe that adds a bright silvery sparkle to the foliage beneath the stalks. It also changes the physical scale of the planting. It maxes out around 50 inches tall and has a much narrower profile than the towering 6-foot stalks of Karl Forster. There is a required trade-off for all these variegated types, though. As the extreme heat of late summer sets in, the vibrant stripes tend to fade out into a standard green. Selecting a variegated grass means you are actively trading late-season foliage color for an intense visual pop right at the start of the year. Beyond leaf color, the Chicago trials also evaluated alternatives that completely abandoned the traditional vertical shape. The most significant structural outlier they found is a grass called Chejudo. Instead of growing into a rigid column, Chejudo forms a wide, rounded mound that tops out at just 33 inches tall. It's covered in soft, silver-green hairs that catch the morning dew, completely contrasting with the stiff, unyielding nature of typical reed grasses. Choosing it means sacrificing that iconic vertical screening effect. Instead of a privacy wall, Chejudo operates as a soft, mid-border filler. Aesthetically, it is a highly desirable plant, largely because it produces beautiful, fluffy blooms in late summer. But it failed the ecological test. It poses such a high risk for aggressive self-sowing that the Chicago Botanic Garden placed it on their active removal list. Even if a plant offers the exact shape and flower you want, its ecological safety must ultimately dictate your final choice. Regardless of which safe cultivar you choose, we need to address the persistent myth that ornamental grasses are a zero-maintenance landscaping solution. As these grasses age, they undergo a biological reality known as crown die-out. Over time, the root mass center dies off, leaving a barren patch of dirt surrounded by a hollow ring of living grass. Rejuvenating it requires heavy labor, digging up the root ball, dividing the outer ring, and replanting the sections. While division only happens every few years, there is a second non-negotiable task you have to perform every single year: the late winter cutback. Using shears or a hedge trimmer, you must cut the entire dense mass of grass down to 6 inches or less above the soil line. Timing is strict here. Because these are cool season grasses, you have to finish this pruning before the plant pushes its vigorous new shoots in early spring. If you wait too long and cut back the old growth after the new growth has started, you'll slice the tips off the fresh blades, permanently stunting the plant's structure for the season. Achieving the pristine, architectural look marketed in design magazines requires scheduled, heavy physical intervention. To pick the right grass, we map these options by invasive risk and visual uniqueness. We immediately eliminate dangerous outliers like miscanthus. Its invasive risk makes it a liability. Down in the completely safe but cliched zone sits Karl Foister. If you are landscaping a massive area and need fast, cheap, foolproof vertical scale with zero design fuss, Karl Foister remains the correct choice. This chart shows how to fill the ideal quadrant, grasses that are ecologically safe but visually unique. If you're building a precise border and want early spring color echoes, choose Eldorado. If your yard is space-constrained and standard grasses are too burly, choose Avalanche for a narrower vertical column, or switch out the form entirely with the soft, low mound of Jeju-do. True garden optimization means moving past the default parking lot cliché. By looking at the actual trial data, you can match a specific cultivar's dimensions and traits to your landscape's exact void.